I've re-recorded the start of this video so many times because I am torn between thinking of the scene as Scott's coming out, i.e., Scott as a person, or Skip's coming out, since this scene also served as him very publicly sharing his relationship with the whole world that was watching him. Of course, I do think it's a great parallel for Skip and Hollander, whereby for Scott and Shane and Ilya too, they didn't just come out as being gay or bi, they also stepped out of a closet with a relationship immediately accompanying that revelation. Hell, one can even say that their relationship being so tied to their coming out also directly influences how they are perceived and what it says about queer acceptance being tied to the respectability of being attached when we do so. And sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, before I dive into the respectability politics at the core of the coming out scene for Scott and why it is actually a pretty necessary bit of his characterization and the role he has to play within the narrative, I will first like to give a quick disclaimer about my What You Miss series, of which this video aptly falls within them. Now, this particular video series is basically a collation of my thoughts and opinions as I watch and rewatch the show, with occasional flashes of insight that pop in due to having read the books and being a lover of them as well. However, I am not about to proclaim myself as being the absolute authority on anything, since it's important we all remember that media is meant to be enjoyed, usually through our own interpretations and personal lenses. And as long as one isn't being bigoted or an absolute asshole, I'm usually more of a shrug, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, just like I'm entitled to mine kind of girl. So, once again, thank you for giving me the space to yap about this show. And whilst we're at it, I would like to say a big thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I started doing this full time at the start of last year, which was the last time I was in paid employment. And a special shout out to Lena, Sherry, Holly, and Kat for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses to mwah. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, maybe even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. Now, just as I do with this series, I am of the opinion that to fully appreciate and understand the nuances in a scene, it's always important to acknowledge its setup, i.e., the scenes that predate it, which set up the context for what we're about to witness. In the case of Scott's coming out, I know the expectation is that I might want to reference events that happened back in episode 3, which chronicled Scott and Kip's relationship. But narratively speaking, I don't like to go that far back because the way in which stories are told, especially within the TV format, it allows for there to be a smooth transition as far as the story and plot is concerned. Each scene bleeds into the others in a seamless way to tell the story and keep the action moving for the entirety of the episode. It is why a well written piece of television, ideally, should have you reach the end and wonder where on earth the time has gone. There is no need for me to go back to the skip relationship timeline, since the break in said relationship was purposeful. It's meant to evoke that jarring sensation by the time we get to the Stanley Cup finals, since it's quite representative of the state, the aching limbo of it, of Scott and Kip's relationship. But once again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take things back a little. As I mentioned earlier, the scenes that predated the skip coming out scene gave much needed context for what we're about to witness, whilst at the same time we were given a foreshadowing for what is to come. Now, I know we don't get actual confirmation of this, but I like to think that the Boston New York match, the game that Yuna and Shane were watching together, was the deciding game for the conference finals to determine which of the two teams would actually make it to the Stanley Cup finals. Quick info for those watching who know nothing about hockey and how the league/season works. The teams are split into the Eastern and Western Conference. Remember, this was brought up during the All Stars game, and it's also why it was pretty clear that the league always pitched Ilya and Shane against each other, since it wasn't until Tampa Bay that they finally split the players for the All Star event along conference lines, which is why Shane and Ilya were able to be on the same team for the first time, because Montreal and Boston are in the same conference. Same thing with New York, which is why Carter Vaughn was on their team as well. But sorry, I digressed. As I was saying, this scene is such a great parallel for what comes later on, in that Shane and his parents are watching the game. It is important because, yes, Shane and Yuna are hockey fanatics, but also because this hints at something monumental that is about to happen. If New York successfully defeats Boston in that particular game, they are one step closer to winning the cup, something the team has not come close to achieving in almost 3 decades. Scott Hunter is the first captain in 28 years to accomplish that. It is monumental. And because it is monumental, there are more eyes on the team as everyone waits to see if they would succeed. The brief glimpse we get to see of Shane and Yuna following the game, and David also paying attention somewhat as he prepares dinner, establishes that. Of course, it also establishes something that I had missed in last week's video when I mentioned that the pasta which we saw Ilya devour is the first homemade meal cooked by a mother that is eaten since his mom passed. And someone mentioned in the comments that it might not have been Yuna who made the meal, since we already established it in the scene that David also is quite capable of cooking dinner for the family. And yes, they were very, very much correct. But back to Yuna and Shane watching the game. She notices that Ilya is not in top form and concludes that he's playing injured, probably hurt his rib or something. Shane doesn't know how she can make that guess, and David is like, the answer is simple. Your mother is a witch. Of course, his focus is on the fact that now that it's been decided that New York has won, it is time the family celebrates, which Shane protests. David notes this, wonders when their family stopped eating Boston. It's a great way to foreshadow the fact that their relationship with Boston and their perception of Ilya and the seeming hatred between him and their son is about to be tossed on his head. Yuna mentions Ilya visiting Shane at the hospital, which to her translates as her hating him less. And like I said, it all foreshadows what we know is fast approaching: Shane's parents discovering the truth and the change that would ensue as a result of them going from hating Ilya to hating him less to accepting him and loving him as a son. Yuna, though, is already calling it for Scott. She believes it is here, and we know she is right. But what she doesn't know, and what we, the audience, at this point of the narrative, are unaware of as well, is just how much of Scott's year this is about to be. Anyway, night falls and Shane texts Ilya about his ribs, which Ilya confirms Yuna's guess and replies that said ribs are killing him. We are meant to read that as, if Yuna was right about Ilya having been injured, then there is a high probability that her prediction about the Admirals and Scott by extension winning might just be correct. It's breadcrumbs. The writing leaves us to connect the dots to see the possibilities so that by the time we get it confirmed in the next scene, we have a aha moment. But back to Shane and Ilya's texting. Shane asks him if he's bummed with Boston out for the running of the cup. Ilya's like, duh, what do you think? To which Shane responds by telling him of Yuna's prediction that the Admirals would win the cup. Now, of course, we have Ilya leaning into the bit, alluding to Scott being ancient and old, which we don't really get much of in season one, but in the latter books, it really does become their thing, i.e., it's a defining part of Scott and Ilya's friendship where the latter keeps teasing the former about his old age. It's their thing, it works. And then we move to the scene, the final game, the last match. As the countdown ticks in the background on the television, Shane and Ilya are texting each other. Yuna is proud as she repeats that she did tell Shane that the Admirals were going to take it. Something that Shane repeats in his message to Ilya, to which Ilya responds that he's irritated. Shane, though, points out that Scott really is a nice guy, and Ilya is like, yeah, lucky for us, is also hot. So to needle Shane, who responds with a pouting emoji. Now, whilst the back and forth might seem silly in the context of what is happening, the Admiral's monumental win, because remember at this point, Scott hasn't done the thing yet, it's still important to note that this is the point in the scene that Yuna asks Shane who he is conversing with, and Shane openly lies to her face that he was chatting with Aiden. It might seem inconsequential, but I do think it matters that the point where Shane lies to his mother before about his chatting with Ilya was before Scott comes out, because the symbolism of what follows and the impact it has on Shane and Ilya's relationship is the connection between Scott stepping fully into the light and basically bearing the truth of who he is to the world, and Shane and Ilya eventually being able to step forward in their own truth to Yuna and David by the end of the season, i.e., Shane stops lying after Scott comes out. But back to the scene itself. It's split three ways. There is what is happening on the rink as the Admirals win, and Scott is about to take a pretty damn monumental step for himself, yes, but also and majorly for the other queer players who will follow behind him. Then there is Shane in the living room with his mother and David, a step up from how things had played out when they were watching the conference finals, i.e., David is not distracted with making dinner this time around. Everyone is present in the family for this moment. This is meant to paint for we, the audience, the scale of the audience, the importance of the moment, the fact that at this point in time, everyone who is a fan of the sport probably has their eyes on watching such a historic win for the Admirals. Like I said, the scene is pretty much split three ways, and the third way is Ilya's side of the divide, with Svetlana and some of his teammates present. All of them are watching, even as Svetlana helps Ilya to pack. Now, I know we can all agree that there's a significance, a big one, to having Scott's coming out be one that is juxtaposed against Shane and Ilya observing the game, since it shows the three-way of the events as they are playing out and how they are important to all the characters involved. Scott, who is coming out, and Shane and Ilya, whose sexuality and relationship with each other has been hidden for so long, finally realizing that something that they had thought was isolated, something that they never could have dreamed could be possible, a door they had always assumed would remain closed to them, is opening thanks to Scott Hunter's quiet determination, bravery, and choice to step out and be true to who he is on the day that he achieved the height, the pinnacle of his career. Like I said, it is pretty important because of Shane and Ilya's identity as queer men, but I also think it's just as important because, to be fair, a core reason why the Admirals were able to make it that far and cinch their win is also because of Shane and Ilya, or rather, because of their absence. Both of them are injured in that moment, creating a situation within the conference where the Admirals were able to step in and push their way to a win. And before anyone tries to type a comment asking if I'm trying to imply that the Admirals are not a good team, that is not what I'm saying. The Admirals are a great team. They have Scott and Vonnie and Eric Bennett and Martijallo. It's a pretty well-rounded team, but Montreal just won back-to-back cups, and the Raiders were on a roll. Both Shane and Ilya's absence, or in Ilya's case, him being less than optimal because of his injury, meant that a space was created that the Admirals could come in and were able to cement their place and win. Now, for those who are wondering why I'm so fixated on the Admirals winning the cup when the scene's core focus is on Scott coming out, well, it's because it matters. Winning the Stanley Cup is the one desire of every single player in the NHL. That is what they dream of. It's the goal they all strive for as professional hockey players. The Admirals, not having won the cup in 28 years, meant that for the duration of Scott's career, his team has never won the cup, and he finally did it. He achieved it. He reached the height that he had always strived for. As he picks up the cup, kisses his skates by, that is Scott at the height of his professional life. It's his dreams coming true, the one thing he's always wanted. That is why, to me at least, we then pan to Kip in that moment and he's crying. Now, I know some people interpret it, that is his tears, as him feeling sad about not being there for Scott, and Elena telling him that he's allowed to be sad seems to drive that point home. And you know what? That is a pretty valid interpretation of that moment. But consider this as well. I read it as Kip tearing up because he's happy for Scott in a bittersweet way. The brief time that he got to live in Scott's apartment, where he was the one waiting for him to get back from practice, when he watched his games, cheering him on at home, when he made the magic smoothies that became a set ritual for his wins and bought him the socks at the bodega so he can always take that bit of magic with him. Always the winning streak that Scott was on with the Admirals, which the Admirals benefited from, started, kicked into gear when Scott met Kip. Kip has been central to that, and Scott has never hidden it. So when Kip tells Elena that he's not sad, I actually read that as him telling the truth. He really isn't sad. He's happy for Scott, happy that Scott got to have his dreams realized, that all that work and the effort and the pressure that the man he loves has carried all this while has finally borne fruit. The Admirals are Stanley Cup champions. It's bittersweet in that whilst he's happy, there's a bit of sadness because the final stretch to get Scott to that point, Kip wasn't there. They had broken up, were separated for a while. And I think that that is slightly sad. And yes, I know people are about to say, but Noria, how can they be broken up? Kip is right there in the seats that Scott had gotten for him. And to that, I would say that yes, he is. The Admirals were at the precipice of the most important game of their existence for the first time in 28 years. They had a real shot of winning the cup. It is not a stretch to imagine that Scott might have left Kip a voicemail, asked him to come see the game if he could make it, told him that he can bring two others because he knows that Kip would come with Eleanor, and also that Kip's father is an Admirals fan, at least according to what Kip had told him back when they were dating. They didn't part ways as enemies or with bad blood between them. It was merely a case of Kip didn't want to keep hiding, wasn't comfortable being in a relationship that would see him go back into the closet, which is his prerogative, by the way. Kip is allowed to decide what he can and cannot accept as far as a relationship with Scott is concerned. And then you have Scott, who has to keep hiding, who isn't ready to come out yet, who is terrified of it actually, so much so that he can't even go out publicly to check out pieces of art with his boyfriend for fear of being discovered, because he knows how much of a uphill battle it will be for him the minute he does. I think a lot of the time we tend to forget just how terrifying the idea of being the first is. There's the sheer terror behind, because there is no one else to hide behind. You will be the sole person standing out, the cynosure of all eyes and judgment, the one to bear the first brunt of things and the responsibility that comes with that, the expectation that is then placed on you by virtue of you being the first, which is where the respectability comes in, which I'll get to shortly. But as I was saying, Scott and Kip don't part ways on bad terms. So to me, at least, it makes sense that Scott invited Kip to the game, and it makes just as much sense that Kip showed up. Now, after Scott is done taking the cup for his spin, he passes it on to Vaughn, at which point there's the wider shot, and we get to see the family of the players slowly making their way to their loved ones, as is tradition after all. That's the thing about winning, isn't it? Getting the chance to stand at the top, the apex of your career, where all your dreams have been realized, and you get to share it with those you love, those who supported you along the way, whose presence and love and care and sacrifices brought you to that point. And that is what hit Scott in that moment. The fact that he is there, he is done. He's done it. Everything he sacrificed, the pieces of himself that he's kept hidden because he doesn't want it to get in the way. He doesn't want it to be what is used to hold him back. Everything is sacrificed and worked for have all led to that moment. And now that that moment is here, he is all alone. A loneliness that is further exacerbated because he gets to see his own teammates. They are surrounded by their family and those they love. They get to be public with it because this is the one moment in their sport where they are allowed to be with those who they love right there on the ice that they love, the ice that has supported them and been their livelihood and sustenance for the entirety of their career, the ice that has demanded so much of them and now has brought their loved ones over to them. Everyone else gets that except him. And so Scott stands there, surrounded by so many people and still ultimately alone, which is why he looks up to the stands to Kip, who would have been there, but to Kip, who would have been there on the ice, should have been there, but isn't because Scott didn't have the courage, wasn't ready for them to be out, and they parted ways because of that. And as Scott looks up at Cape, we hear the announcers noticing this, but believing that he's looking at the fans. Of course, at this point, Ilya is packing up. It's summer, which means that he's meant to be headed back to Russia as it is tradition. Svetlana reminds him to not forget what he wanted to bring for his niece, and he notes that. He also, alongside Svetlana, notices that Scott seems to be staring hard into the audience with a great commentary by the commentators going on in the background about Scott doing so because he's acknowledging his fans who have stood by him like they are not wrong. He is looking at the one person who stood by him through it all, who is still standing by him. I mean, Skip is right there after all, isn't he? He accepted Scott's invite and showed up even though they were over. He showed up. And Kip and Eleanor noticed Scott's eyes on Kip, especially because Scott at that point had looked around, observed what his teammate got to have, what he wants for himself, and he takes in a visible breath, gives himself a nod to pep himself up, and then he gestures to Kip. Kip, who is confused about what this means, if Scott is referring to him, to which Scott mouths the words, "Yes, you, come," laughingly. Elena encourages her bestie to go after all, like she had told Scott at the gala. In as much as Kip deserves sunshine, so does Scott. And if Scott is choosing to step into the sunshine with her best friend, the man he loves, then she's down to give all the encouragement necessary. And so Kip heads down the stands towards Scott. As all of this is playing out, Shane is watching, curious, wondering what is happening, something that is echoed by the commentators who notice Kip making his way through and wonder if it's a super fan or something that Scott is acknowledging. And it's such a great little nod at how heterosexuality is seen as the default that you would have people be willfully blind to queer connotations and what it means until they are hit smack dab in the face with a kiss or even more before they then connect what they are seeing to what it actually means. Now, as Scott continues to encourage Kip to come down, everyone is tuned in, everyone is watching, everyone is wondering what on earth is going on, which is reflected in the back and forth texts of Shane and Ilya. Kip finally makes it down and Scott joins him. When he hops over the boards, Scott grabs his hands and pulls him to the center of the ice to where the family and friends of the winner to where the families of the winning players are gathered. As Scott pulls him along, we hear Kip's words, "You do not have to do this." He's trying to get Scott to see that he doesn't have to make some big declaration. He doesn't have to push himself and his sexuality to so publicly before everyone else. He knows how much Scott Scott's privacy means to him, and this is a big step. Scott's well-being is still what is paramount to Kip, and he doesn't want Scott making a decision because he's feeling carried away in the moment or believes that he has no choice but to do this or believes that this is what Kip absolutely wants. And Scott is like, yes, yes, I do. This is my choice. I get to decide. This is what I want. And as Shane and Ilya watch on stunned, Scott and Kip have made it to center ice. Scott leans in and kisses his boyfriend publicly, openly, unapologetically, as loud and in your face as a coming out can get in front of millions worldwide, right in front of the cameras. He's at the top of his career. He's just led this team as team captain to win the Stanley Cup for the first time in 28 years. Nobody else in the Admiral's recent history has done that or been able to do that. He has the cachet, the acknowledgement of his skill that can't be taken away from him, and a boyfriend to boot. Like I said earlier, there's something about being first, setting the pace, opening doors, and how it puts you in the spotlight, how it expects so much from you. The responsibility it places on a person to be the best possible representative ever. Scott is the idealized version of that, the person perfectly primed, boring, as Ilya calls him, in that he's all American, well liked, well respected, isn't a party animal. He's older and matured and settled in a way that gives him the respectability that the league can latch onto and market as a symbol of acceptable queerness. The fact that he's in a relationship, i.e., has settled down with someone even prior to him coming out, adds further to the stability that Scott is able to convey. He's not a party animal. He's not this wild player who runs the risk of corrupting the league. He's the model perfect representation of what a respectable queer looks like. He's the all American alongside his working class boyfriend who happens to be an art historian. They are cookie cutter perfect in a way that eases the rest of the league into the others that are soon to follow. I bring this up because I've seen some comments where some fans do not understand why Shane is so insistent on not coming out in his conversation with Yuna when Scott's already come out. And I guess that a lot of people don't really understand the scale of messiness that is two rivals whose very teams and the league itself thrives and profits of their rivalry, not only fucking, but falling in love and entering into a relationship with each other. That is messiness. It's vastly different from the more acceptable, calm, and quiet of Scott and his perfect boyfriend. This isn't me saying, though, that Scott's actions weren't brave. They are incredibly so, as a matter of fact. I just felt like some people might need the added perspective, even as, we all head to the cottage. But of course, these are just my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Whether or not you agree with me, please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this fan, haven't done so yet, but enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.